Thanks. Good day, everybody. A couple of weeks ago, I was given a couple of days' notice to spend 10 minutes talking to 150 people in our firm, ranging from 22-year-old analysts to 60-year-old MDs. Yes, we have some of those, about the CEO's perspective of the current COVID crisis. Now, when I got that call, it did absolutely nothing for my day other than add to my usual list of challenges. But I was excited to tackle it. And this talk is really the same talk I gave to that group, only slightly more has been allocated, or a lot have an audience of all CEOs today, or that's what I thought. And it's not the same group of young BD types that I'm used to dealing with inside of our firm. Now, I didn't start out with a title in mind. Rather, I let the target audience tell me what they needed from me. And the title that fell out of my audience analysis about what they wanted from me. And that brings us to our very first C, D's of CEO, and that's comradeship. Comrades are the people you want to go into battle, and it's too late to build those relationships when the shooting starts. And so the moral of the story is start picking your comrades now for the next battle. Very vague and broad topic, and really no time to in a completely unclear audience. I did what any good CEO or leader would do, and I turned to 6 comrades who are closer to the coalface than me and asked them what they thought that I want to hear. And I am fortunate to be surrounded by 6 good vice presidents with whom I like to think I have always been responsive and invested in, and did my best to be there for them, even when nobody asked me to. So even though I am senior to them, they are really my comrades. And I've already defined comrades, but let me put it away. Think about continuing our wartime metaphor. Threats, foxholes, and foxholes make very fast friends. Preferences on whose foxhole you jump into and who jumps into the foxhole with you quite a while ago. And the way that decision gets made is kind of by you. If you invest in people every day unilaterally, especially when you don't need to, increase the probability of other people jumping into your foxhole and being there for you. Now, these 6 VPs become my comrades over late that got the pair this meeting. I fired off a West Coast late email to them, and all 6 of them got back to me within the first hour of their next business day, which was 8 a.m. my time. And all 6 of them came back with at least 13 different things they wanted me to cover in a 10-minute talk, which made this a lot harder in some ways and easier than others. I had a pretty wide set of targets to hit, which means chances are I'd hit some of them. So to get started, I looked at their questions and inferred what they were looking for was a historical perspective. They wanted me to make sense of all of this for them. And I started thinking about the wide range of ages, both of our people as well as the CEOs I might be talking to, and realized I might be able to offer something there. So I thought I'd start by introducing myself, not with my bones, but with my life experience, and making myself a little more accessible by being a little minute and talking about how I feel today, which brings us to our next C, which is context. As CEOs or leaders, board members, board chairs, which is what I serve most often today, it's our job to put things in context, first for ourselves, frankly, and then for all of our stakeholders. If we don't do it, who will? So here's how I put the COVID situation into context for my audience. Some of you may remember this, some of you may not believe this is possible, but this is the United States in 1979, and this was my experience of it. I was 16 years old in 1976 and pretty excited about having a license, and my parents about having my license, so it could send me to the gas station on the odd days when our car was eligible to be filled up. Now, for those of you who may not have been born or don't remember it, we had odd-even gas rationing in 1979. And I do not know how the gentleman with the lawnmower decided whether he was odd or even. I would conclude he's odd just by the picture, but nonetheless, this is really what existed in 1979. Was this the new normal? Is this what I had to look forward to? Well, that looked pretty good compared to 1982. In 1982, somebody started sticking cyanide into Tylenol bottles. And some of you may remember the legendary case about how Johnson & Johnson CEO James Burke handled this. But literally, this is before we had tamper-proof packaging. And could you go to the grocery store and buy something without playing, cyanide roulette? Is this the new normal? Do I have to be afraid of every package I own going forward? There were a few more episodes between then and now, but in 2000, there I was a CEO of my second or third company in 2000, and things were looking pretty good in the internet until about January or so of 2000, and the bubble burst. And everybody around me had, of course, made millions of dollars, and I had been the only guy not making money, and then the whole market fell apart. Is this the new normal? Is the tech bubble over? Is the internet bubble? Have I lost my opportunity to make money? Turns out that wasn't the new normal either. I don't have to say much about what came along a year later to change the new normal again. I think many of us lived through that and still are living through that. So we came along to 2003, where suddenly we had to be worried about weapons of mass destruction, anthrax, and little white powder in envelopes to members of our government, the post office, and everybody else. And many of us running out and buying plain bags and duct tape to protect ourselves from the oncoming weapons of mass destruction attack. Is this the new normal? Do I have to protect my children from this? Well, unfortunately, something along in 2008, that new normal, the 1-2 punch. On the left-hand side, and here this may sound familiar to what we're currently living through, a bunch of chickens did a bunch of unnatural things in Asia, and suddenly we had the Asian flu, which was producing all kinds of gross effects on people. And it was a epidemic in Asia, and was this going to come and get us another way? We had a good old-fashioned financial crisis where legendary institutions like Lehman Brothers were being sold at auction, and the auction might have been overnight. Is this the new normal? Well, as most of you realize, we went on from that. The past 12 years have been fantastic for tech. And we have a whole other seminar on what's going to happen to tech after the normal that we're in, but that's not today's discussion. Well, here we are in 2020. And nobody's been here before. So even though I just wandered through a whole bunch of changing and new normal threatening crises, how do you manage and lead in this bizarre environment? And what have I learned over a bunch of years that might be helpful in that respect? Well, let me now do an introduction of myself, and I promise not to read every bullet point on this page. For those of you doing the math, you've already figured out that I'm 56 years old and will turn 57 shortly, hopefully. And I've had a career for 35 years managing and working in big and small companies, starting out as a chemical engineer at Procter & Gamble, which formed most of my private equity skills, because I still look at every single problem as a continuous third tank reactor, which is a talk I would love to give some other day. But went on to work at P&G and went off to places like business school and management consulting firms, and then went on to be CEO of a bunch of public and private companies and had a whole bunch of board experiences, and currently serve on or have served on 9 or 10 of Insight's boards, and I chair most of the ones I serve on. So the point here is I've seen a bunch of stuff and had a bunch of quote unquote learning experiences. And when I sat down to think about what are all the things that I learned and how I would help CEOs, a whole pile of C's came falling out. So after listening to my audience, I came up with a bunch of things that all seem to start with C. Now, we've covered a lot of these, 2 of these already. We've covered comradeship and context, but here's the punchline of what I want to communicate to you today. I don't know when the next crisis is coming. It could be this fall, it could be next year, it could be in 10 years. But the bottom line is you have to start preparing for something that you don't know what it's going to be, and you don't know when it's going to be. And you don't know how it's going to affect you, but can you prepare for it anyway with that lack of uncertainty or that lack of certainty? And my answer to that is, yeah, you can with your behavior every day right now. So we've talked about comrade and context, but let's talk about the next C, which is coaching. And let me take you into a slightly different place. Since most of us on this phone call or webinar have been CEOs or are CEOs, there's something we all know and share that's kind of the dirty secret. Being a CEO is pretty lonely. It is lonely at the top, as the saying goes. And if we all tell the truth to each other as quiet, we only control about 25% about what goes on around us. It's sort of like being a parent. At best, you're just trying to keep your kid alive. And CEOs don't have anybody to talk to. They can't talk to their direct reports very often because their direct reports are exactly what they want to talk about. They can't talk to the board because the board is often sitting in judgment and may in fact not have been doing their job and you get a comfort day. So it's a super lonely job at the CEO job. And I've thought about that as a CEO and what I should do as a board chairman or as a board member for that matter. And the most important thing that I think I have done and would continue to aim to do is to create a safe place for the CEOs that I work with. And as I thought about that, it's really what I tried to do as a CEO. And why is that important and what does that mean? Creating a safe place is a place where your direct reports can come to you with problems they have, whether they created or not, whether they have an answer or not, because we've all told people don't come to me with problems, come to me with problems and solutions. But can they come to you? Do they feel safe? And why do they need a safe place? And why do you need a safe place? You want to come to you with problems before they turn into crises so you can avoid them or help them avoid them. If they're scared of you, they won't come to you. And this applies at all levels. If CEOs think a board member or the board in general or the board chair is a scary place to be, they're going to hide. They're going to hide the problems. They're going to avoid the issues. And then suddenly it's going to turn into a crisis. Now, think about how that plays out over time. You can't suddenly go to somebody and say, I want you to be safe with me today. This takes a long time to build this relationship. Start today. Create a safe place for your executives to come to you and tell you they've got a problem. The next C I want to talk about is something I've experienced for quite a few years now, coaching and working with CEOs in SaaS software businesses, but became incredibly clear over the last couple of months. And I'm sure all of you have gotten past this, but in case a couple of you haven't, I thought I would touch on it. Cash is king. Cash is super important. Right now, it's not about bookings. And maybe if you're a licensing business or a license model, it's a little bit more about bookings, but it's really not about bookings. And it's definitely not about revenue. It's about cash. It's about beer money. And I was surprised by how much time and energy I had to spend over the last 2 months helping our CEOs understand that they were not worried about scenarios where bookings would come in 10, 20, 40, 60% short. They had to be worried about people actually paying them for the bookings they already had. I have a couple of education CEOs where the schools just shut down and it wasn't clear the district leaders would even be in the office to pay them. And how do you run the business if not another check comes in for the next 60 days? Really focusing on cash, not bookings, not revenue, not receivables, not other figments, not gross merchandise value, but actual cash coming in. That's the lifeblood of the business. That's why that rises up to be the fourth C in our list. Well, once you've established the first three and are working on coaching your team, focusing on cash, candor is the next C. Are you facing up to reality? Are you looking at what the real issues are? It's just simply too easy, since many of you and many of our CEOs are founders or entrepreneurs who are naturally, or salespeople who came up from the sales ranks. It's pretty easy to be an optimist, and it's pretty much your nature to be an optimist. Well, optimism is great, and optimism is what makes founders and entrepreneurs and salespeople get up and get out of bed every day and walk through walls and walk under walls and around walls and through walls. But right now, we need to be incredibly candid. Are you facing up to reality? Do you know what the problem is? Are you lying to yourself? Have you gotten to the truths? Once you've gotten to the truths, you've got to do the calculus. Do you have the numbers? Have you done the math? Have you built a business model with the data that you need? If it's been running by the seat of the pants, if it's top down, if we're assuming we're going to have a 15% growth rate, and the only thing we're going to change is changing the growth rate from 15 to 10, and we don't know what each of the cost drivers are, and we don't know what we're paying people in Bulgaria versus Baltimore, that's a problem. And it's really hard to fix the problem if you can't do the math, and it's really hard to do the math if you don't have a business model, and it's really hard to do the business model if you don't have the data. Start today. There's lots of great excuses for not having a good Excel business model, things like Anaplan, many other wonderful software products. But if you don't have a model that has dials for you to turn and understand what drives what, it's going to be very hard for you to work your way out of the problem, forecast it, model it, and board on what you're going to do, what capital you might need, and what levers you can pull to allocate that capital very carefully and preciously. So we're halfway through our list of C's, and we're just a little bit over halfway through our time today. Once you've done the calculus and you've got the math and you've got the model and you're facing up to the truth, have you been creative and curious, or are you just rearranging the deck chairs? Asking everyone just to take 5 to 20% off the top is not terribly creative. You're not going to get real change in your business. You're not going to change your model. You're not going to change your leadership team. You're not going to really unlock what could be the true value creation. Frankly, when I do this exercise very often, what I tell people is fire every single person in the company and hire them back one at a time based on the value they create. And usually the first clue I give the CEO is, the clue is you, the CEO, are not the first person that gets hired back. It's generally that person in IT or DevOps who has the keys, who understands how to make things work and keep it up and running. That's the first person you hire back. And as you run through that exercise and figure out what you really need to keep the lights on and what you really need to keep revenue coming in, you start to figure out who the first one off the boat is and who the very last one off the boat is. So be creative, be curious, and be open-minded. Start with a clean sheet of paper. I'll give you an example of money we found in several of our companies that were completely out of sight and out of mind to people. At Insight, we drive a lot of our companies through M&A, and very often in M&A, there's a seller escrow. And the escrow is money we owe the seller, and it's sitting off in a separate account, and nobody thinks about it. And 12 or 18 or 24 months later, whatever the case may be, somebody gets a check for X million dollars, and it's off our balance sheet, and it's out of sight, out of mind. Well, it turns out that money sitting there, the seller may not need it. They've already made a big percentage of their money, and they have no place to put that money. So even if you paid them the escrow today, where are they going to put it? 0.25% savings account, 1% muni bonds. Well, we went out and got very creative with many of our companies and went to the sellers and said, hey, why don't you lend that money back to us? You know the business, you sold it to us. We'll pay you X% interest, and X% is way over what they would get in the muni bond. And sure enough, almost every time we've done this with sellers, they said, that's great. I could use that kind of income, and I know what I'm lending to. This is a really good deal for me. So that's a way to get very creative with financing when you really open your mind up to it. Well, now that you've calculated your plan, you've been creative and curious about it, you've got to be very clear and credible about it. And we'll talk about credibility and clarity a little bit separately here. But the first part of clarity is, does it make sense on paper? Everyone can talk to themselves and everyone can talk out loud, and to use a metaphor, hold press conferences that sound interesting to yourself, but until you can commit it to writing, does it make sense? Can you put it on paper? Can you write it down? Do you mind it being read by other people? And is it unassailable? Be very clear, put it on paper, make sure it's understandable to everybody. Treat people like adults, tell them the truth and be clear about it. Don't hide. Tell them what you know and what you don't know. Don't worry about saying what you don't know. There's an old saying that Mark Twain gets credit for, although I don't think he's actually the person that authored the saying, but it ain't what you don't know that gets you into trouble. It's what you know for sure that just ain't so. So don't be afraid to tell people what you don't know. It's far more credible. Credibility is a super hard thing to build when you need it. It takes time. So start today building credibility as a CEO. So when you tell people, I need you all to take a 20% pay cut because here's where we are, they believe you. Be clear and be credible. And while you're doing that, the trick is to exude a calm confidence. I like to think about a swan. And when you think about a swan, it is paddling furiously under the water, but all anyone sees is a majestic bird gliding along on the surface. If you're doing your job of creating safety and getting upward information flow and being clear and being candid, even though you may be personally terrified inside, you don't have to show anybody that. Just show them that you are gliding through the top while you're pedaling furiously. Again, just between us CEOs or former CEOs, we all know, just like parents, that we're making it up as we go half the time. There's no playbook. We have no monopoly on the truth. While you're doing this calm confidence, incredibly and clearly acting, you must communicate. Do all the stakeholders get it? Have you talked to every stakeholder? Are you just talking to your direct reports? Are you just talking to your board? Are you talking to your customers? Are you talking to your customers' customers? Are you talking to the frontline employees who are also talking to your customers? Do you have firsthand knowledge of the stakeholders? This will add to your credibility. This will add to your clarity. And frankly, it'll add to your confidence. Do all the stakeholders get it? Do they know where you're coming from? You can't communicate if you don't know your audience and what they care about. And if you don't understand them, they understand you and they can't get it. That forms the basis for compassion. If you understand them and truly understand them, you can approach what is going to be hard in a very compassionate and humane way. You're probably have already asked and are going to continue to ask people to do some very tough things that you might not otherwise do. And we've seen CEOs have to do very difficult things, laying off 50%, 70%, taking 40% pay cuts, furloughing people, letting people go without any severance at all. It's a horrible time, and we're having to do horrible things, no matter how much we'd like to do it better, no matter how much we'd like to throw money at the problem and feel better about it. We're doing some terrible things and taking people's jobs away. It's just a little bit easier if your team understands that you are compassionate about it, you feel it, and they can be compassionate about it, and it's with you. Finally, after all of this comes course correction. See my comments on candor and clarity. Fix your mistakes. I saw a fantastic example that I wanted to share with you, recently set by the Philadelphia 76ers of all people. After telling that they were going to cut salaries by 20% for anyone making at least $50,000, Josh Harris, the 76ers managing partner, released the following statement publicly. I think it was actually a tweet he put this out. What he said was, after listening to our staff and players, it's clear that we made the wrong decision. We have reversed it and will be paying these employees their full salaries. This is an extraordinary time in our world, unlike any most of us have ever lived through before, and ordinary business decisions are not enough to meet the moment. To our staff and our fans, I apologize for getting this wrong. I thought that was a spectacular admission of someone just saying, I am human, I got it wrong, I was my best. And my guess is that he built even more credibility and followership with the people that his fan base is his employees, which are high-priced players and people who make far less, collect tickets and dispensing with beer and food in the stadium. So in 26 minutes, I've tried to communicate to you a bunch of C's. Ironically, after I presented this, I had people mailing more and more C's into me, and perhaps any of you would have your own contributions. So with that, we have a couple of minutes left for some questions, and I see that one is already teed up. I won't out the person who asked it, but I will read the question. Would this advice change for a business that is growing fast in current circumstances? I think most of this advice does not change for business growing super fast in current circumstances. And we're thankfully investors in some businesses that are growing super fast. If you're delivering people, for example, let's say Delivery Hero or some of our other portfolio companies like that, you're growing so fast, you're turning customers away. That doesn't change nearly anything on here. If you'll recall, nothing I said in here was you have to cut everything right. Probably the most important thing you need to know if you're growing super fast is the calculus. Do you really know what is driving that growth? And are you feeding it properly and measuring it properly? When the fish are jumping in the boat, which is fortunately happening, it seems like, for the person who's asking this question, that's the time to really double down on your business model. Don't kid yourself. Don't think it's brilliance in product or genius in go-to-market. It's just that you are at the right port in the storm right now, and you're lucky. It may be things that you're doing well, but this is a good time to truly understand that business model and what is driving it. And if things aren't moving the needle, if NPS isn't changing, if CSAT isn't changing, figure out if product engagement isn't changing, if adoption isn't changing, what is driving that model? What are you benefiting from now? What needle is going up right now? Because it's probably going to go down sometime in the future, which we in some ways hope. We all hope this is not the new normal, as I started. So it's a good idea to know what needle is moving right now and have a business model that can measure that coming down. Starts to trend down, how do you react to that? We have about a minute or so left. If there are any other questions, please bang away at your keyboards. If not, I thank you all for investing some time today, and hopefully you got a few things out of this. If you have any further questions, would like to discuss this further, please get in touch with any of us at Insight. Our emails are on our website, and I've appreciated the opportunity to speak with you this afternoon.
Thank you so much. Thank you everyone for joining.